Welcome. Thank you for joining me. When the Community Relations Committee asked for a foundational presentation about Upper Arlington's history, obviously there was a lot of material to choose from. Today we're going to look at objects, places, things in our community that exist and try to understand the history, why they are the way that they are. I am Kristen Greenberg, the Executive Director of the Upper Arlington Historical Society. The Society's mission is to discover, preserve, and celebrate Upper Arlington's history for the UA community and beyond in an ongoing and sustainable way. First, let's ground ourselves in the physical space of Upper Arlington. This map from our city shows that we are bounded on the west by the Scioto River, on the east somewhat by North Star, on the south by Fifth Avenue, and on the north somewhat by Henderson. We are 10 square miles in size and landlocked. And we know that we can see Columbus off to the southeast. So we are northwest of downtown. Do you know the name of our high school yearbook? Why, it's the Nor'Wester, named because we are northwest of the city. And actually that name is adopted from something earlier. And I'm going to put a pin in that. We'll get back to that later in our journey today. So obviously, Upper Arlington just didn't appear like this, like we know it today. And so we're a story of growth, and let's look into that. You're probably familiar with what I call these entrance rocks to our city. For example, on either side of Lane Avenue, the west and the east entrances. When you coming south on Kenny, you'll see one of these. And there are two mysteries on these rocks that we're going to unravel. First, how did we get the name Upper Arlington? And what the heck happened in 1918? This is from our friends from Grandview Heights and Marble Cliff Historical Society. A photo of 1890 south of Fifth Avenue and along what we know today as Riverside Drive. The fencing in front is actually where railroad tracks are. These are summer homes of the Price family. The home on the left has been demolished, but the home on the right was actually moved and still exists today at the corner of Arlington and Cardigan Avenues. These homes, if you can imagine Columbus in 1890 downtown in the summer, was very hot and somewhat dirty. And so these folks, the Price family, would come all the way out here to their summer home and get that fresh breeze off the Scioto River. Now the Prices play a role in our name, Upper Arlington. Timothy Price was the patriarch of the Price family. He was a carpenter, said that he worked on the interior of the Ohio State House. He also owned the stone quarry you see pictured in this 1872 map, and that is kind of along what we consider Riverside Drive today and just south of Lane Avenue. So in what we know today as Upper Arlington. It's said that one of his stones is in the Washington Monument. So Timothy Price was a prominent man of the time. In 1889, he, his son John E. Price, and John's brother-in-law Charles Griswold purchased the western ridge along the Scioto River from what is now Fifth Avenue south to today's First Avenue. John's father, Timothy Price, platted the land, and they gave the plat the name Arlington because they thought it was, quote, fanciful, unquote. That's from a newspaper article from the time. This Arlington place was the first development in this area. Okay, so again, this is 1889. By 1901, a larger group of land, including Arlington Place, became officially the hamlet of Marble Cliff. Now, many residents had wanted to keep that Arlington name, but there was a problem. As you can see from this Google map of today, there is an Arlington, Ohio, and that is just south of Findlay. And so when they were forming this hamlet of Marble Cliff in 1901, the U.S. Postal Service would not allow them to call the area Arlington because, like I said, an Arlington, Ohio already existed. But on Christmas Eve of 1913, brothers King and Ben Thompson purchased over 800 acres of land north of Fifth Avenue, and they began developing it in 1914. So when they chose the name for their development to be Upper Arlington, it made sense to residents back then because Arlington Place had existed and many people still referred to that area as Arlington. So that solves the mystery of why we're called Upper Arlington. So let's talk about the date now. I've said the Thompson brothers bought land to begin Upper Arlington in 1913. So why do our entrance rocks say 1918? These pictures here are from our centennial celebration in 2018. It's July 4th, when we officially marked our city's centennial. This is at Northam Park. There's the plaques, the bronze bears cast by a former UA resident, and there's also a history walk that shares a lot of Upper Arlington's history that you can go explore for yourself. Obviously, something happened before 1918, but we consider that year one. So let's explore why that is the case. This is a snippet from the city's land annexation map by decade. And I want to focus you on the gray area, the most southern piece of Upper Arlington. This is the original Upper Arlington as it was in 1918. So what happened before 1918? This is a sales brochure that's actually available to you to read on uaarchives.org, our partner site with the Upper Arlington Public Library. As I said, King and Ben Thompson purchased a large section of land from James T. Miller on Christmas Eve 1913. This is a new idea again, this planned community, this garden city concept where the homes would sit following the contours of the land along curving streets with many trees. You see the term restricted on the cover of this pamphlet from 1914. It is noted in the brochure that the restrictions refer to open green spaces throughout the plat, several pocket parks, as you find currently in South Arlington, generous setbacks, ensuring a large front and large corner lots, and a carefully controlled environment to develop businesses and housing. We're going to stick a pin in further restrictions. We'll get back to those a little bit later. Just for fun, the first paved street in Upper Arlington was Roxbury Road in 1915, and the first home occupied was 1722 Bedford Road, again occupied in 1915. This is that home in the late 1910s, and this is the home today. And that's what's so amazing about Upper Arlington's historic district, is how many of these examples we have of homes that have not significantly been altered from their original exterior construction. This is the home in the late 1910s on the left, and then the home today. And this is what makes our Upper Arlington Historic District so amazing. We have many, many examples of homes whose exterior facade has remained mostly unchanged since its original construction. Now, like I said, this development was a new idea for this area, and it took some time to plat it and pave the streets, get the infrastructure, and build homes. This is an article from 1918 when King Thompson and other residents filed to become an official village. And as you can see towards the end of the article, it says there are 200 persons living within its boundaries, and that the county commissioners are going to hear this petition on March 20th of 1918. Now remember, I said the Nor'Wester yearbook got its name from something else? This is that. The Nor'Wester magazine began publication in November of 1917 and was the monthly magazine that residents received through March of 1922. It's actually 1927 when UA schools picked up the Nor'Wester title for the yearbook. So this is a page from the July 1918 magazine. Remember, in March, we've become a village. We had elections at the end of June, as this article denotes. It says 51 out of 55 voters cast their ballot. And remember, at this point, this would have been just the men. Women were given the right to vote on village issues in Upper Arlington in 1919, before the actual national suffrage movement. It says we have 300 residents at the time. This is James T. Miller. He is the individual that sold the Thompson brothers the land. He also becomes our first mayor. So he's mayor from 1918 to 1919, and then unfortunately he passes away in 1920. So this is why we mark year one as 1918, our official status as a village. We are obviously a city now. That happened in 1941. We had 5,000 residents in the 1940 census, and that was the benchmark to bump us up to city status. In 1956, we established the current council manager form of government, in which we elect our council members and they hire a city manager to run the day-to-day operations. So let's move on to our second question. Obviously, you see the golden bear image throughout our community, on our city flag, at football games, on people's shorts, paw prints on the driveway. So that begs the question, how exactly did the Golden Bear become our mascot, and when did that happen? Here you see the covers of two yearbooks, the one on the left from 1928 and the one on the right from 1929. There's a stark difference. In 1928, the school board decided that we needed to have an athletic team name. To this point, we were simply referred to in the yearbook as the orange and black, which were our school colors originally. So in 1928, a school committee formed and had a contest to submit possible athletic team names. Two Upper Arlington students at the time, Wayne Geisinger and Dallas Head, along with Dallas's dad, sat and read a book, a college guidebook, to review possible mascots. They selected Golden Bears because they thought it was attractive and durable. This ultimately and obviously was the name the committee selected. So we see the reference to the Golden Bear here on the cover of the 1929 yearbook, and there's also references noted inside in the text. However, our school colors continued to be orange and black until around the year 1941, when they officially changed to what we know today as the Golden Black and more closely aligned with the Golden Bear. Perhaps one of the most famous Golden Bears is Jack Nicholas. He was a 1957 graduate of Upper Arlington High School. And shortly after turning professional in 1962, Jack was asked to create a logo for an apparel line. An Australian sports writer referred to Jack as a big, cuddly golden bear. Obviously, you can see from this 1956 picture, he has the physique that could be compared to a golden bear. And since Jack had been a golden bear in high school, he decided to take that moniker on for his line, his marketing. And you can see that with the image on the right. Obviously, this is our new high school building, opened in 2021 through a massive community engagement process. Many of our surrounding communities, Dublin, Hilliard, Worthington, they all have multiple high schools, and believe it or not, that was our plan at one time as well. So let's explore the next question. Why is it today that we only have one high school? And let's look a little bit about our school's history. I'm going to take us back to this annexation map. Remember, we looked at the gray southern piece as the original development. The color coding over time shows that in the 50s, which is the blue, and the 1960s, which is the green, we had some massive land annexations happening. It's hard to believe, but this aerial shot from 1950 shows just how wide open this land was at the time. You can see at the very top about where 5 Points is today, and towards the bottom where the yellow circle is, gets to be where the high school land stands, the southern portion with the fields. Now let's go back in time for a minute. This shows what today we know as Jones Middle School, but the black and white photo shows that center section of the building as it was when it opened in March of 1924, to grades 1 through 6 that occupied that building. It later became our high school building when Barrington Elementary School opened in 1937. This is where the name Jones comes from. Mr. J.W. Jones was principal of the building when it opened in 1924. If you think about our other schools, besides the high school, they're actually named for the streets where they reside. This was the new high school in the fall of 1956, leaving Jones Middle School to become the junior high school at the time. And again, this is where the fields are at the southern point of the high school property today. And it was our high school through the spring of 2021. This is just a fun page from the dedication brochure from February of 1957, showing that the entrance, the main entrance to the building, is not yet complete. Students had to enter through the Brandon Road entrance when it first opened. So again, it's 1956, 1957, and as we see from this annexation map, we're still annexing lots and lots of land. So there is a thought at the time that we would need another high school. Here are two news articles that bookend that story. The first from 1960, where the school board buys a 34-acre tract of land. Today we know that as Thompson Park, named for the city's first Parks and Recreation Director, Ken Thompson. So they purchased this land in 1960 and sit on it for a while. As the article on the right shows, in 1963, they decide they no longer need a second high school because City Council has capped our northern annexation, and they feel that the high school that stands at Ridgeview Road can handle future enrollments. What happened soon after that, over the next decade, was several renovations on that Ridgeview Road building. Many classrooms and offices were opened. In 1965, the natatorium and the auditorium are built. In 1969, private money was used to build the stadium. And in the fall of 1970, a 33,000 square foot learning center is opened at that site. Now this is a nod to that first graduating class of seniors in 1925 from UA schools. Prior to that, our senior students would go somewhere like Grandview to finish up their education. While there were many changes with the schools and the school buildings over the course of the years, one thing that did not change is the look of that class. You see that these are all white students, and I want to delve briefly into that area. Back to the restrictions on our property. For home sales that began in 1914, we talked about the restrictions of the open spaces and the parks and whatnot. By 1926, we are seeing documented in property deeds a racially restrictive clause for that specific property that does not allow someone of color to purchase that property. And from 1926 to 1948, this is a very common characteristic of the property deeds that were created and for property sold during that time. primarily south of today's Fishinger Road because that's where Upper Arlington existed at the time. In 1948, there was a Supreme Court case coming from a dispute in Missouri, the state of Missouri, called Shelley versus Kramer. And that said that the courts cannot enforce these racially restrictive clauses in property deeds, thereby ending the viability of that practice. So what happened then in 1948 in the Canterbury area, so a subset of neighborhoods in Upper Arlington, they formed the Northwest Arlington Association. And that association retained the right to approve or disapprove any buyer of a property within their bounds. And that included information about the buyer's identity. So obviously in 1968, there was the Fair Housing Act nationally that did not allow discrimination based on race, etc. But the Northwest Arlington Association persevered, and it wasn't until 1970 when Alfred Ashley, a black man from New Jersey, tried to purchase a property along Leeds Road and was denied, that he went to court with a couple of neighbors here in UA to the Franklin County Court, and they ultimately disbanded the association. So that's a little short dive into our property restrictions. There is a much longer piece on uahistory.org under the Learn tab if you wish to learn more. So our fourth question deals with the pre-Upper Arlington people, and I'm showing you a picture of the Amelito Murillo barn, which is in sunny 95 Park, right next to Greensview Elementary School. And this interior of the barn is very special, those beams. So let's find out about that. There are actually several things in our community that come from the pre-UA past. So I'm going to talk about a few stories here briefly about our pioneers. This map is from 1872 when we were part of Perry Township, Southern Perry Township. And the bottom part of that green outlined area is around where Wellington School is today. And it was owned by the Legg family. And the Leggs moved here in the early 1800s, and they built a barn that was approximately 20 by 30 feet in size. Now their neighbors, which are on the upper left corner of the green square, the McCoys, had a barn on their property. And at some point, that barn burned down, and the Leggs were willing to donate this barn to the McCoys. So they moved the barn up to the McCoy property, which would be along Lane Road, around where Lane Road Library is, across the street. And that barn grew in size because they used remnants from the burnt down barn. And so the barn became about 36 by 48 feet. And up through the 1960s, the barn was used to sell eggs and to shelter livestock. Well, in the mid-2000s, the last descendant of the McCoy family passed away. And the barn was saved from demolition through a partnership of the UA Historical Society, the City of UA, the Community Foundation, and many other organizations. And it was dismantled and put into storage till it could be figured out what to do with it. And the Amelito Murillo barn is the fruition of that. They used the historic beams to create the interior of that event space. So definitely next time you're in the barn, look up and appreciate the history that is there. A quick look at this 1872 map. It's hard to see, but there are pioneers named Henderson, McCoy, Kenny, and you'll be familiar with those as they show as road names now in today's Upper Arlington. We also have a very unique pioneer, Pleasant Litchford, who came to the Columbus area sometime in the early 1830s. Through 1849, he purchased 227 acres of land, as shown by these green squares on this 1872 map. The square to the left is the Tremont Center, Tremont School, Upper Arlington Public Library, St. Agatha area, Northern Park. And the square to the right encompasses our high school land. Now, what makes Pleasant so interesting, among many things, is that he was a formerly enslaved person in Virginia who purchased his freedom to move to this area. And he lived here until his death in 1879. Here we see Pleasant's obituary, from which we can garner several facts about his life, including that he was a blacksmith. He was a founder of Second Baptist Church, which does exist in Columbus today. What isn't here, and we do have documentation of, is that he donated land to build a colored school just to the east of today's Tremont Elementary School. Unfortunately, we don't know anything else about that colored school, but we definitely know that in 1955, when the schools were getting ready to build that Ridgeview Road High School, and this shows a drawing of that property, the school's property there, you see the little notation in the lower left, cemetery. This was Pleasant Litchford's family cemetery, a half an acre of property that retained the right of egress and ingress to the family over all of those years. Even though the property around it changed hands and moved out of the Litchford family, they still had the rights to that small half an acre. So in 1955, the school board eventually ended up in court to settle with Litchford descendants in order to take over that property and be able to build the school. They did agree to reinter bodies from the cemetery. Most went to Union Cemetery in the mid-50s, some went to Greenlawn. With the construction of the new high school that opened in 2021 and the advancement of technology, a more thorough search of that cemetery site was able to be completed, working closely with the descendants of the Litchford family. And one fully intact body and 3 partial remains were found, and UA Schools again is working with the descendants to honor those. There will be, or perhaps is, depending when you're listening, a memorial site south of the natatorium in the parking lot area. There's a park there now that will have several signs that detail Pleasant Litchford's amazing story and honor his and his family's memory. So this brings us to our last question. Perhaps you've seen these stars on Northwest Boulevard. They get repainted every year to honor the most celebrated day in Upper Arlington. So let's talk about July 4th and some of its origins in our community. From 1915 to 1925, the towns of Grandview, Marble Cliff, and Upper Arlington celebrated Field Day. This always took place around Flag Day in June. Here you see a program from 1923. I love it. Starts out with the baby contest, and then there's some sporting events, flower shows, barbecues, and it ends with a street dance at the end of the day. There was a parade that traveled from Grandview Avenue along 1st to Wyandotte and then 5th to Cambridge, ending at Miller Park in Upper Arlington. Well, in 1923, a week after that event, this article appeared in the paper. Upper Arlington, it seemed, wanted to branch out and have its own celebration, selecting July 4th as the date. And they are doing the tease here about what this will be. These are not the best quality, but they're the pictures we have of this very first Upper Arlington July 4th celebration. From late afternoon through the evening, folks picnicked at Miller Park, enjoyed a national flag ceremony, and had hour-long fireworks that began at 9 p.m. because, remember, there was no daylight savings time back then. And they had a street dance into the wee hours of the morning. Now, July 4th has changed over time. The UACA started in 1933 and took over the event and continue to do that today. It's reported that at this first fireworks celebration in 1923, there were about 1,500 people that viewed the fireworks. This photo, courtesy of the UACA, shows a recent party in the park, and the UACA estimates that there's now about 40,000 folks that watch our fireworks annually. With the many traditions for July 4th, I'm just selecting this one today. You know our parade starts with this Spirit of 76 group. Well, that's been a tradition since 1935. The photo on the left is undated, but obviously an early rendition of this. It's a reenactment of Archibald Willard's Revolutionary War battlefield painting. And actually generations of the same families have fulfilled these roles in the Spirit of 76 over the decades. I'd like to thank the UA Public Library for partnering with the Historical Society and making a lot of these images and documents accessible to the public through their UA Archive site. And here's how you can get connected with the Upper Arlington Historical Society. We are an independent nonprofit serving the UA community, and we'd love to talk with you. Thank you for listening today.